He said these were the cells where the MK Ultra officers, working side by side with Nazis, carried out those gruesome experiments.
Last month, they had a House Oversight Committee hearing on MK Ultra, one of the secret mind control programs ran by the CIA decades ago. And one of the witnesses that they brought in to testify was Dr. Stephen Kinzer. Now, Stephen Kinzer is one of my favorite authors. He's written some great books, All the Shah's Men, about the coup in Iran in 1953, The True Flag, about the rise of American imperialism during the McKinley administration and Teddy Roosevelt, The Brothers, about Alan and John Foster Dulles. But the book that they mainly discussed during the MK Ultra hearing was Poisoner in Chief, which is about Sidney Gottlieb, who was running the CIA's MK Ultra program. And in this clip, Representative Luna is asking Stephen Kinzer about the ties between Nazi scientists and the CIA and Project Paperclip. So let's check that out.
My next question is also for you, sir. Operation Paperclip brought over 1,600 German scientists into the United States government after World War II, including individuals who had conducted human experimentation in concentration camps. The CIA and military were aware of their backgrounds and recruited them anyways. In your research, did you find direct documentation between Paperclip scientists and the development of MK Ultra's experimental protocols, specifically the use of mescaline, hypnosis, and sensory deprivation, which were techniques also documented at Dachau?
Absolutely. Kurt Blome, who was the chief of biological weapons development for the Nazi government, came to work for the CIA. So did Walter Schreiber, who was the Surgeon General of the Nazi Army. I can just tell a brief story. When I was researching my book, I found what I think might be the first secret CIA prison or black site. It's a nice chalet in Germany. And the guy who now owns it took me into the basement. He said these were the cells where the MK Ultra officers, working side by side with Nazis, carried out those gruesome experiments, which were actually just continuations of the experiments that those Nazis had been conducting just a few years earlier right down the road.
So he's talking about that CIA black site, and what he's talking about is a place called Villa Schuster. It's in a city called Kronberg, and it's near Frankfurt in Germany. And they were taking prisoners there. They were doing interrogations there. They were doing all sorts of psychological experiments and other things that we now know basically equate to, torture. But it wasn't just Kurt Blome and the Nazi scientists that had this treatment. Like he talks about in the book, we had U.S. government scientists at Camp Detrick here in Maryland, and they were obsessed with, a lot of the Nazi scientists and the experiments and the things that they were doing. Like we know now that eugenics and all these other things weren't just exclusive to the Nazis. They were being carried out all over. And some of the worst experiments were actually being carried out by some of the Japanese scientists. One of them specifically was Japanese Army General Shiro Ishii, and he ran this unit. It was called Unit 731, and it was in Manchuria in China. And we made deals with them too to release all of their research, and we gave them immunity. And basically, none of the people from Shiro Ishii's unit were charged with anything. General MacArthur is actually the guy that signed the deal to give them amnesty. But I want to read a little bit from Stephen Kinzer's book here about what was going on with Unit 731. So it says, the prisoners that were taken to Unit 731 were exposed to poison gas so that their lungs could later be removed and studied, slowly roasted by electricity to determine voltages needed to produce death, hung upside down to study the progress of natural choking, locked into high-pressure chambers until their eyes popped out. They were spun around in centrifuges. They were infected with anthrax, syphilis, plague, cholera, and other diseases. There were females that were forcibly impregnated to provide infants for vivisection, and vivisection is basically like experiments that are done to live subjects in order to, see how they react and what the results are. They were bound to stakes to be incinerated by soldiers testing flamethrowers, and slowly frozen to observe the progress of hyperthermia. Air was injected into victims' veins to provoke embolisms, Animal blood was injected to see what effect it would have. Some were dissected alive or had limbs amputated so attendants could monitor their slow deaths by bleeding and gangrene. And it goes on. There's some other stuff about how they tied them, like bent over with their rears exposed, and they would have, explosives go off and shrapnel would hit them, and then they could see how long it would take for them to die. So it wasn't just extreme scientists. This wasn't just Joseph Mengele and all the Nazis that we're familiar with. This was going on, with the Japanese military as well. And we made deals with these people. We brought these people over and started working with them and using their research to further the research that we were conducting. And I don't know about you, but I find that troublesome. And so we'll go into this next clip here. Representative Mace asked about how many people died, and Stephen Kinzer explains how we really don't know.
And how many people do you think died through the MK Ultra program or were murdered?
No idea.
If those who died largely were outside the United States, many people were experimented to death in that safe house in Germany that I visited. And people in the neighborhood told me they knew what was going on in that house, and that people who were experimented to death are now buried in what used to be forest plots that are now covered over
Do
with
you think the
apartments.
German government knew what the U.S. government was doing? Do you think there was a partnership there or knowledge?
Yes. There is a memo that was written by the German Secret Service to Konrad Adenauer, the Chancellor of Germany, telling him Americans are here capturing citizens, capturing people and conducting extreme experiments which are in violation of German law. And Adenauer decided to put that aside and not to
I
investigate
have one more
further.
question.
And so you see there, Dr. Kinzer's talking about how, a lot of these things occurred outside of the United States, and the government likes that because that gives them, it creates distance. It allows them to cover things up, gives them plausible deniability. They can say that they didn't even know this was going on. But these things weren't just going on at black sites. They weren't going on at secret prisons and, secret military bases. They were also going on at mainstream institutions. I did a video a couple months ago about Dr. Ewan Cameron, the psychiatrist in Canada, and the things that he was doing at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal. And, these borderline, this was torture in a different sense. I mean, they weren't, killing people the way that Shiro Ishii was, but he was subjecting, patients that were dealing with mild depression and things like that. And he was doing sensory deprivation, large dosages of LSD and other psychoactive drugs. And, some of those people, if they didn't die, he definitely completely, destroyed their minds, and this is all documented. And Canada's actually been trying to compensate some of the victims of his. But it's good to see these things getting the mainstream attention that they need. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment.